Well, hello, Nature Coast. I am Chad Bresson, and this is Rhythms of Grace for this Wednesday. I hope you are having a great day, and just thought I'd share some thoughts for this particular day. You know, one of the things both my family and Emily's family are dealing with people who are in the hospital right now, my father and her mother. And so thinking about, okay, what am I thinking about, and what is it that kind of helps track my thoughts as we deal from a distance, parents that are going through some difficult times as far as their health is concerned. And I was brought back to a particular passage that we looked at Sunday in our adult Bible study, and it's Acts 4, and in Acts 4, it's very fascinating the way the church is both reading their Old Testament and then what they're asking for in light of some of the difficulties that they face as a congregation. Now, last week here on Rhythms of Grace, we talked about Psalm 2. And Psalm 2 is at the heart of what's going on here in Acts 4, so that's where I'm going to begin today. And one of the things we're going to do in a just very, very short period of time, and it's not going to take long, but one of the interesting things about Acts 4 is the way that the New Testament church is reading their Old Testament. In fact, the way they're reading the Old Testament is one of the things that has absolutely energized me over the past few years. And this is why the Old Testament for me has become quite addicting in terms of just reading it and understanding it in light of the cross and the resurrection, in light of the fact that Jesus has fulfilled all things, and also in light of the fact as we read and we look at the way the church is reading their Old Testament, we come to see that Jesus, it really is the subject matter, the content of the Old Testament, even though all those things happened hundreds and even thousands of years before him coming. They were all looking forward to and anticipating his arrival and what he would do for his people. So, in light of that, this morning, or it's probably afternoon for some of you, it's still morning for me here in South Texas, we're going to actually read part of Psalm 2, because this becomes important as we look at Acts chapter 4. So bear with me. So I can look at Psalm 2 really quickly, and then we're going to move to Acts 4. So Psalm 2 starts this way, and this is what ends up in Acts 4. Why do the nations rage, and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth take their stand, and the rulers conspire together against the Lord and his anointed. Let's tear off their chains and throw their ropes off of us. The one enthroned in heaven laughs. The Lord ridicules them. Then he speaks to them in his anger and terrifies them in his wrath. And this is what he says. I have installed my king on Zion, my holy mountain. I will declare the Lord's decree. He said to me, you are my son. Today I have become your father. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your inheritance and the ends of the earth your possession. You will break them with an iron scepter. You will shatter them like pottery. And as we talked about last week, a lot of times we come to Psalm 2, and that's our big triumphant psalm. This is where we talk about Jesus coming on a white horse. And certainly, again, in the book of Revelation, John pulls from Psalm 2 and presents Jesus that way. But we always also still have to remember that even then Jesus is being portrayed as somebody who is coming to the aid of churches that are being persecuted and churches that aren't necessarily going to be rid of their persecution just yet, but that portrayal is important to them. Here in Acts 4, though, this is where I want to go. So the Acts 4 story is John and Peter have been arrested, and they've been arrested, and they're interrogated, and then they're let go. And they come back to the church, and they report all the things that have happened to them in their arrest. And what's interesting then is what the church does next. So that's where we're going to begin with Acts chapter 4. Acts 4:23. After they were released, again, Peter and John, before the Sanhedrin, and probably the very same guys that had crucified Jesus, After they were released, they went to their own people, reported everything the chief priests and the elders had said to them. When they heard this, they raised their voices together to God and said, Master, you are the one who made the heaven, the earth, and the sea, and everything in them. An allusion to creation. They're praying to Jesus. Look, you created all this. You are responsible for creation. You've done all this. You control all of this. And then they say, you said through the Holy Spirit, by the mouth of our father David, your servant, which is kind of an interesting thing because Psalm 2 doesn't really say it's a Psalm of David yet. Here in Acts 4, the church is certainly interpreting it as a Psalm of David. And he says, then they quote from those first few verses, why do the Gentiles rage and the peoples plot futile things? The kings of the earth take their stand and the rulers assemble together against the Lord and his Messiah. That's the quote from Psalm 2. Why do the Gentiles rage, no longer nations, why do the Gentiles rage and the peoples plot futile things? The kings of the earth take their stand. And then verse 27, here's their interpretation of what they have just quoted. For in fact, in this city, in Jerusalem, both Herod and Pontius Pilate, with the Gentiles and the people of Israel, so now they've Herod, so he's the representative of Rome. Pontius Pilate, also a representative of Rome. With the Gentiles, talking about all of the Romans, and the people of Israel. Okay, you take the Gentiles and Israel, that's everybody. That's the whole world. With the Gentiles and people of Israel assembled together against your holy servant Jesus, whom you've anointed. So now they're seeing Psalm 2 as, okay, this has happened to Jesus. It wasn't just David and the kings of the Old Testament now. They're reading this psalm in light of Jesus and what has happened to him. And it's interesting then, they say this. They've assembled together against your holy servant Jesus, whom you've anointed, to do whatever your hand and your will predestined to take place. We're not going to go down that road, but that's a fascinating comment. And now the rest of their prayer. And now, Lord, consider their threats and grant that your servants may speak your word with all boldness, while you stretch out your hand for healing, and signs and wonders are performed through the name of your holy servant, Jesus. So that's the story of Acts 4. We have an interpretation of Acts 4, seeing the events of Psalm 2 fulfilled in Christ and the cross and the resurrection. What happened to him at the hands of the Romans and at the hands of Israel. He was crucified. Now, just a couple of comments then as we think about what does that mean? What does it mean for us? One thing we need to see here, then, is that as this early church in Acts 4 is reading Psalm 2, they're seeing their own story. They're seeing the story of Jesus and how it has unfolded for Jesus. And now they're seeing themselves in that same story. What has just happened to Peter and John is all part of this fulfillment of Jesus in Psalm 2. The nations, the Gentiles, everybody raged against Jesus, and they ended up crucifying him. It's kind of funny. The nations rage, and the result of their raging is the crucifixion and death of Jesus. And now we have Peter and John, same thing. They're now brought before the Sanhedrin. They're threatened, and then they're released. Now the nations are raging against the early church, and they're raging against them. And as Luke chronicles this for Theophilus, Theophilus is able to see, oh, okay, so this is happening to us, this is happening to me. And the nations, both, whether it's Gentiles, whether it's Jews, all of this conspiring against Jesus. So that's the first thing. We need to see that they see their story in Psalm 2. But then the other interesting thing, we mentioned this a little bit last week, they see Psalm 2 a little differently. Instead of seeing Jesus on this white horse coming to rescue them from the Romans and from those who are pulling them in front of the Sanhedrin, ready to arrest them at any time, they are not asking for that. They just want boldness. They're asking for reassurance. They're asking for comfort. They're asking for a boldness in light of the fact that all the nations are raging against Jesus and them in light of Jesus. They don't ask for the rider on the white horse. And that's where the rest of this comes in. Because look what they're asking for. They're asking for boldness, that your servants may speak your word with all boldness. So they're placing themselves in this very story that they see in Psalm 2. Give us more confidence in that. So Christ isn't simply ruling and reigning over creation, what we see in the first piece. He's also through the cross. This is Christ's strength. And he's breaking the rod of iron. He's breaking all of this iron scepter, the strength of the nations, all that the nations consider powerful. He breaks that. He's breaking that through the cross. And that shows up in what they speak your word with all boldness, verse 29. And then verse 30, while you stretch out your hand for healing and signs and wonders are performed through the name of your holy servant Jesus. And what they're asking for there has actually shown up earlier in Acts 4, because it says in Acts 4, verse 4, many of those who heard this word, heard this gospel, believed, and the number of men came to about 5,000. So in the subsequent, there were 3,000 on the day of Pentecost. Now we get to Acts chapter 4. It's up to 5,000. So the gospel is exploding. It's increasing. And in light of what has happened to Peter and John, in reading Psalm 2, they want God, they want Jesus from the heavens to continue what he's already started. They want the gospel to continue. They want the word to continue to go forward. They want to continue these signs, this healing that Jesus has brought because of his cross. They want that to continue as well. They want this gospel message that is started in Acts 2 to continue, and it does. That's what the rest of the book of Acts is about. I love the book of Acts because we see that. Luke makes it incredibly clear. But the interesting thing is this gospel spread isn't going to come from Christ, exercising his rule and his reign by politically crushing his enemies and getting rid of the enemies. No, it's going to come on a cross. And so the early church is saying, we're dying with Jesus, and we want God and Jesus to continue his reign, the increase of Christ's kingdom here on earth. Even as the nations rage, we want Jesus to continue to break the iron scepter through the gospel, through us. We want to be bold in that word. We want to continue the gospel message. We want to continue the healing that the gospel brings. That's the story of Acts 4. So in our day, right now, even on this Wednesday, we may have had rough days, and we may be thinking, oh, Jesus, simply return and get me out of this mess. Would you please come break those rods of iron, whatever it is that has me enslaved or is trying to persecute me today, which we tend to read it that way. We need to read it more like the church in Acts 4, where this is an opportunity, all the nations raging against Jesus. This is an opportunity for the gospel. This is an opportunity for the word. This is an opportunity for Jesus to bring healing. And so what we understand then about Psalm 2 through Acts 4 is that it's grace. It's not power. It's grace that is the power. It's not political power. It's not willpower. It's grace that breaks the rod of iron. And that's what we need today. That's what I'm going to need for the rest of today. There's going to be instances in which I'm going to try and, I'm going to try to enforce my will. I'm going to be upset at nations raging against Jesus. And I need to go to Acts 4 and say, Jesus, please give me more grace. Give me more grace in your word. Bring more healing to whatever is going on in my life through a cross, through me dying to myself. The whole idea of death. May I find that as being what it is I need through the rest of the day. So, that's Acts 4, 23 through 28, and its understanding of Psalm 2. Again, Jesus on the white horse, a little different, breaking the rod of iron through grace. The grace of the gospel, the grace that he provides through his gospel. And that's what I need for today. I hope that is encouraging to you, whatever you're going through today. Because I need it, and I know others need to hear it as well. I need to hear this. because there's all sorts of things in my life right now that I can't control, and it just seems like it's all out of control. And yet when I look at, okay, yeah, Jesus is in control. What I'm having to say is, yeah, Jesus is in control through his grace and the gospel, and that's what I need. So I hope that you're having a fine Wednesday. I hope this has been encouraging to you, and we will see you again sometime next week, hopefully, and then tuning in again throughout the rest of the week for more Rhythms of Grace right here at the Nature Coast Facebook page. You have a good day now, in Jesus.